We have breaking news. Rapper Sean Diddy Combs is in solitary confinement after a source says he was involved in a prison fight.
Diddy's life inside prison just got worse. Not a little worse, not a rough week that fades into the background. We're talking about a violent incident inside a federal correctional facility in New Jersey that's already reshaping his entire prison experience, with consequences serious enough to put his release timeline, his privileges, and his daily conditions all under threat at once. To understand how far he's fallen, you have to understand how high he was. Sean Combs didn't just become successful in music. He became one of the defining architects of an entire era. From launching Bad Boy Records in the early 90s, he brought Biggie Smalls to the world, built the Sean John clothing line into a brand that won him a CFDA award, launched Revolt TV, expanded into spirits with C-Rock, and was consistently named among the most powerful businessmen on the planet, with Forbes repeatedly placing his net worth north of $1 billion. For nearly 3 decades, he moved through the world like someone the rules simply didn't apply to. Private jets, luxury estates across 4 cities, yachts off the French Riviera. That was the life of Sean Combs. Then, it all collapsed. In October 2025, a federal judge sentenced him to 50 months in a federal correctional institution after a jury found him guilty on 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution, violations of the Mann Act. He was acquitted on the more serious sex trafficking and racketeering charges, but the conviction that stuck was still enough to send him away for more than 4 years. Just like that, the man who once commanded the world's attention became federal inmate number 52111-054, with a projected release date initially set for May 2028, later adjusted to February 2028 based on good behavior credits. That date now exists under a serious cloud of uncertainty, and here's why. Diddy arrived at FCI Fort Dix in New Jersey on October 30th, 2025, weeks after sentencing. Fort Dix is a low-security facility in Burlington County, housing roughly 4,000 inmates, not a small, quiet place where a famous name moves through unnoticed. His legal team had specifically requested placement there for its residential drug abuse program, with attorney Tenny Garagos filing a letter asking the Bureau of Prisons to recommend Fort Dix so he could, in her words, address drug abuse issues and maximize family visitation and rehabilitative efforts. There was also a practical incentive. Successfully completing that 12-month program can significantly reduce a sentence, meaning Diddy was theoretically looking at release well before even the adjusted February 2028 date. That was the plan. Then reality set in. He wasn't placed directly into general population. Sources told ABC News he was initially housed in the facility's special drug treatment unit, a separated environment tied to the rehabilitation program. Early photos showed him in a gray knit cap, smiling, interacting with other inmates, including former NBA player Sebastian Telfair, a fellow Brooklyn native also serving time at Fort Dix. On the surface, he appeared to be settling in, but things started coming apart almost immediately. Just 4 days after arriving, on November 3, 2025, Diddy made a phone call that violated Bureau of Prisons regulations. According to documents obtained by CBS News, he called a woman to discuss visitation plans, asked about having $200 in singles brought in, then asked to speak with someone about blogs, at which point the woman added a third unknown male to the call, a direct violation of BOP policy, since federal inmates can only speak with pre-approved contacts, and 3-way calls are explicitly prohibited. When confronted, Diddy claimed he hadn't been given the inmate handbook or gone through orientation. Officials weren't moved, recommending a 90-day suspension of his phone and commissary privileges, filed on November 4th, his 56th birthday. His spokesperson pushed back, claiming the call had been initiated by one of his attorneys and was protected by privilege, but the documentation described it as personal, not legal. Either way, just days into his sentence, he'd already triggered a formal disciplinary process. There was one bright spot early on. He landed a job as a chaplain's assistant, one of the more desirable assignments at Fort Dix, working in an air-conditioned chapel maintaining the religious library and assisting with services. For a man who once ran his empire from the 61st floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, it was about as stark a contrast as you could picture. But within the world of Fort Dix, it was actually a sought-after role that spoke to his ability to navigate the facility's social dynamics early on. That's the contrast worth sitting with for a second. Private jets, full-time staff, and total freedom from schedule and consequence, replaced by mandatory morning counts, institutional meals, monitored phone calls, and a commissary system with strict limits. No assistant, no legal team on standby, no security detail. Just a bunk, a cell block, and rules that apply to everyone equally regardless of how many platinum records are attached to your name. Then came the incident that's reshaped everything. According to multiple reports, TMZ, ABC News, Fox News, and Complex among them, Diddy got into a physical altercation with another inmate at Fort Dix after that inmate made a disrespectful remark toward him. Rather than let it go, Diddy escalated the exchange into a physical confrontation, with both men reportedly throwing punches and shoving before correctional officers stepped in and separated them. Sources described him as having held his own, but holding your own in a prison fight and avoiding its consequences are two very different things. Following the altercation, prison officials reportedly placed him in solitary confinement, formerly known as the Special Housing Unit. The Bureau of Prisons hasn't confirmed specifics, with a spokesperson telling outlets the agency doesn't comment on individual disciplinary matters, but multiple sources confirmed he was removed from general population and isolated. Solitary in a federal facility means confinement to a small cell for roughly 22 to 24 hours a day, minimal solo recreation, meals delivered to the cell, and a total suspension of programming, work assignments, and access to the chapel or library. Research consistently shows prolonged isolation like this produces real psychological effects: rising anxiety, disrupted sleep, and mounting mental pressure the longer it continues. For someone who spent 3 decades surrounded by the constant noise of studios, boardrooms, and tour buses, that kind of silence represents something far beyond simple punishment. The bigger question is what this means for his release timeline. Before the fight, he'd already benefited from good behavior credits, moving his date from May 2028 to February 2028, with the possibility of shaving off even more time through the drug program. But federal inmates who accumulate disciplinary violations, especially physical altercations, put all of that at risk. The Bureau of Prisons can review and revoke earned time credits and adjust projected release dates based on documented infractions, and a prison fight isn't a minor note in a file. It triggers a formal hearing before the institution's disciplinary committee, with sanctions that can range well beyond time already spent in isolation. Whether he loses days, weeks, or a significant chunk of his good behavior credits depends entirely on how that process plays out, but the uncertainty alone marks a real setback from where things stood before. Part of what made this more likely is that at some point after his early placement in the drug treatment unit, he transitioned into Fort Dix's general population, living among the full 4,000 inmate count. That's a far less controlled environment. Some inmates extend respect to a high-profile arrival, others see it as an opportunity to make a name for themselves through confrontation. And by all accounts, Diddy hadn't yet fully mastered how to navigate that dynamic. Between the phone violation, reports of alcohol allegedly found near him, which his team denied, and now the fight, a pattern had already started forming well before this incident. Inside federal custody, behavior isn't just personal conduct, it's currency. Disciplinary records shape housing assignments, work eligibility, programming access, and critically, eligibility for the earned time credits that can shorten a sentence. Inmates who stay clean and complete programming exit under the most favorable conditions possible. Those who accumulate violations and end up in the SHU face a path that gets progressively harder to navigate. This fight is the most serious mark yet on a record that's had rocky patches from day one. So where does this leave things? The Bureau of Prisons will complete its review, and a disciplinary hearing will determine formal sanctions. Anything from extended SHU time to the loss of good behavior credits, programming eligibility, or work assignments. Until then, Diddy sits in solitary confinement in a New Jersey federal prison with no staff, no handlers, and no control over what happens next, waiting to find out exactly how much one altercation has cost him. What's clear is that the walls of a federal facility don't care about a resume. Not Grammy nominations, not a Forbes ranking, not decades of cultural influence. The same counts happen every morning. The same rules apply to everyone, and the same uncertainty now hangs over a release date he'd been counting on. His journey through the system so far is nowhere close to the smooth rehabilitation story his legal team tried to present back in October, and how much worse it gets from here depends entirely on whether he can adapt to an environment that's made clear it won't make a single exception for who he used to be. What do you think about Diddy's situation at Fort Dix, and how this fight is going to affect the rest of his sentence? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.